Hey, welcome home. Welcome to Christpoint Church. Welcome to our creation study, evolution versus creation, week 2.
Week 2.
I'm Pastor Steve, lead pastor at Christpoint Church.
I'm Pastor Sam, campus pastor at Christpoint Smithville.
And we're here to have some fun. This is one of the most fun teachings I've ever done.
I'm having fun already.
I love it. So I want you to notice something. We old school up in here tonight now. I'm going back in the early 2000s with my notebooks, my handwritten notebooks. I got 2 of them from 2 different eras and 2 different times of teaching. So I've been doing this for a lot of years. I love the topic. I love to get conversation about the topic.
Well, I can tell it's old. Everything's written in these and thous. So.
Yeah. So let's jump right in. Tonight we're going to talk about something a little different. A little bit different than we did last week, but we're still talking about the age.
I love it. So, a couple questions, jumping right in, right? Why did people live to be 900 years old plus in the Bible, right? Why?
Good question, yeah.
Why were the dinosaurs so big? That's my big question. I love dinosaurs. And were there really giants, right? Like the Bible tells us, were there really giants who lived on the earth that were really over 10 feet tall? That's what I want to know. Those are the questions I want answered tonight. Okay, so we're going to. I love it. We're going to dive right in. So why did people live to be 900 years old, and why do we not live to be 900 years old now? Were there dinosaurs? And I love dinosaurs. Right?
Were there really dinosaurs? Did they really exist? Because this is the one I think that gets us. Well, we've found proof that there's tons of dinosaurs all over the place. So, and they're digging up their bones everywhere. They must have existed, and they had to have been millions of years old. We're going to look at that. And were there really giants in the land? Okay, so let's look at it. Let's jump into the New Testament, talking about referring back to the Old Testament. So let's look at that.
The Apostle Peter writes in his second epistle, chapter 3, verse 5, he says, scoffers, people who want to argue, right? Scoffers are willingly ignorant of, 1, the word of God, that the heavens are old, the heavens were of old, and 2, the earth stood out of the water and in the water, whatever that means, right?
Okay, so that may be a little bit confusing. Is that the earth stood out of the water and in the water? Right. But here's my favorite part. I love it. Write this down. Please write this down. This is key point number greatest of all. Scoffers were willingly ignorant. Do you know what willingly ignorant means? You are stupid on purpose. You're dumb on purpose. I love it. I love it. So he's saying in a diplomatic way, you're stupid on purpose. So the people were stupid on purpose, and in verse 6, read that.
He goes on to say, whereby the world that then was, talking about in the past, right, being overflowed with water, talking about the flood, right, perished. The world was destroyed, is what he's saying right here.
So how did people live to be so old, so big, all this stuff? So we have a universal event that happened.
Right.
Now, this is what we do know. We do know that this was not a local flood. I want to go back. I said it last week. I went into every cave on our property my entire life. I've been into every one of them in 2 or 3 counties. I don't dig it anymore. I did then. But every one of them had seashells fossilized and embedded into the walls.
Really?
Every one of them. My atheist uncle pointed at those when I was a kid and said, there's probably proof right there that the earth was flooded. So we're going to move on. So the earth, people were willingly ignorant about creation. God flooded the earth. These people perished because of their dumb on purpose. And so let's just preface this with Genesis 1:1, verse 5, and then we'll look at Exodus chapter 20, verse 11, and before we get started.
Going all the way back to, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then in verse 5, Genesis says, and God called the light day, right? And the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning, the first day.
Now, you notice what it says there, the first day. Not a day, but the first day. So we're going to look at that in a 6-day creation. We're going to look at that. So it's not talking of a day. In other words, in history, how many the days are there? One. How many a days are there? Every one of them.
Right.
All of them. Every day is a day. But there's only going to be one first day, and Genesis speaks of it. So verse 11 in chapter 20 of Exodus.
Moses writes in Exodus chapter 20, verse 11, "For in 6 days the Lord created heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is." So we have here's proof of where we started at creation. So let's get into this, why they lived to be so much bigger and larger and longer. So here's the thing. Genesis chapter 1 verse 7 begins to speak of the firmaments. So now in the first mention calls it the firmament. Later on, Genesis begins to start calling it firmaments, because at one point there was only one. Now there are three. Basically, God sliced the firmaments into threes: the 1 and 2 and third level, third heavens. Also, firmaments are considered heavens. Okay.
So what we breathe is a we're living in one of the heavens. We're breathing one of the firmaments. Okay, so that's not waters. That's firmaments where we live and breathe. Another firmament, or heavens, is the atmosphere above us, and the third heaven is where Paul was taken up to. So our atmosphere has 6 layers. This is proven scientific fact. Our atmosphere has 6 layers. If we didn't have these layers, stuff would beat us and kill us, and debris from because outer space is full of junk. So this is a proven fact, scientific proof, that the Earth used to have a 7th layer, and they theorized that it was water because they found pockets of ice in space.
Right.
So more than likely it couldn't be water, so it probably had to be ice. So a 7th layer of ice, so a canopy of water or a canopy of ice would create what we would know of on Earth as a terrarium.
Oh.
Now think about it. I did this when I was a kid. I thought it was the coolest thing.
Right.
They continue to just sweat, and it's almost like a rainforest, and everything's lush, and everything just continues to grow. And so that terrarium effect has a little bit of different. So I'll give you an example. One of those long-necked dinosaurs, I think they call them an Apatosaurus.
Bless you.
Thank you. They have lungs that are very small, about like a horse, and their nostrils are about like a horse. So scientists have now come out and said, we think we know what happened to the dinosaurs. We think that they smothered to death from a lack of oxygen.
Oh.
Think about it. If you had to suck air through that long of a neck into that small of a lungs, through those small of a nostrils, you would struggle for oxygen. You would struggle for air.
I'm so thankful I have no neck.
Well, that comes as an opinion. So this is what happens when you create a terrarium effect. Have you ever thought about maybe what happens?
Right. There's more pressure, definitely. Right. The oxygen be different too.
Perfect.
Right.
Perfect. So when you place a 7th layer, now this is not spelled out in the word, but it kind of is. You just have to kind of decipher through it in the book of Genesis, and then some of the references back. But here's the thing: when you have that kind of condition, and you put 2 people on the earth, and you tell them to fill it, to go on and
they're already naked.
And they're so it shouldn't be hard. So you put 2 people on the earth, and they coincided with they didn't eat meat. Everything was herbivore.
Right.
Everything ate from the ground. Now Adam and Eve could not eat from one tree. We know that. So when you put a terrarium effect into the entire atmosphere of the world, then what you do is you create double the pressure,
right,
and double the oxygen.
Oh, wow, right.
Now, a dinosaur who has the nostrils the size of a horse but has to suck air for 100 feet into small lungs, with double the oxygen and double the pressure, man, that dude's going to live and live and live. So let me give you an example. A reptile never stops growing its entire life. You know, a snake never stops shedding its skin.
Right.
Every year it grows, it has to shed its skin. Reptiles never stop growing. Never. So the thing is once you put that reptile into those conditions for that many years, then what you're doing, what's the number one thing that causes us to age?
McDonald's.
Not McDonald's and not your wife.
Oh, okay.
And not your children.
Those are my only 3 guesses.
Well, so what would be your fourth guess? The number one aging element in the world today?
Help me out.
The sun.
The sun.
The sun. The sun is the number one thing that ages us. Now, I'm going to tell you, I'll give you an example. Buy yourself a red car in about 15 years. It's going to be kind of a faded pink. So the sun ages and just wears out everything. The only thing that blocks the sun's gamma rays, the aging, basically the radiation bullets.
It's the ozone layer, right?
Is water.
Okay.
It does filter it, but it doesn't block it.
Okay.
So water blocks it. Lead blocks it. That's why Superman can't, see through the lead.
Makes a lot of sense.
And concrete blocks it.
Okay.
So Noah wasn't walking around with a lead umbrella or concrete cover, but he was walking around, and everything that lived and breathed in those days, probably 1,500 years, maybe as much as 2,500 years, everything that lived and breathed under those intense conditions would never stop growing. They would never age. They would age so super slow because the number one aging element has been filtered out.
With the water.
That
seventh layer of atmosphere.
With that seventh layer of atmosphere. Now all of a sudden, everything can live longer. And I'm going to show you a form of evolution. A form of evolution is when a caterpillar turns into a butterfly.
Right.
I'm going to show you what a metamorphosis looks like. When you were 15 years old, you don't look like you do at your age now.
I have the same amount of body hair, but yeah.
Yeah. So you have to shave in your ears now. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you have to braid your back hair.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. We have to do that with Tina all the time. So the thing is we began to start having different growth. Like with me. I didn't used to have gray hair. I have gray hair now. So the thing is we change and our bodies change. And if you take a reptile and put a reptile in those conditions, we've never seen what a reptile can do if it can live hundreds and hundreds of years.
With all that oxygen,
with
all that pressure.
Double pressure, double oxygen, with no sun field to age them. They probably would grow big spikes. They would grow spikes on their tails. That would be their next level of growth. Like maybe we've never seen them become a butterfly yet.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
That's what it looks like.
Man.
So let's talk about, okay, so now we know why dinosaurs could get that big.
I dig it, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about people being larger.
Okay, right.
So under these conditions, the blood plasma would be so saturated with oxygen, oxygen-rich blood, that you would heal so quickly, and you would be so much more resilient. Your bones would be so much stronger. You would grow so much more rapidly. Now, evolution says that we're constantly evolving to become better. Now, my question is, why have they never found something that is evolving into something else? There's not.
Right.
So
microevolutions, but no macroevolutions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So now what we're looking at is people. What evolution is teaching is that we started from something lesser and we've become something bigger. I'm afraid that that's not true. We've started from something bigger and we've become lesser because now we have an aging element that ages us regularly. Our oxygen is way different and the pressure way different. And it was the gravity pulls us to a point to where every generation is probably getting a little smaller, a little bit less in size and stature. So let me show you what it would create. divers back years ago, divers would get that, would come up and they would get the blood, the oxygen in their blood because they ascended too quickly. And they thought of something that might help them, and it did. They created hyperbaric chambers.
Right.
They have some hyperbaric chambers that are large enough to put tons of people in. And mostly universities, those kinds of things. They're super large. And there's some personal. I always heard Michael Jackson had one. I'm sure he's not using it now, but I'd like to see what it might sell for. But anyway, hyperbaric chambers. They would put professional athletes. Now football teams. Most every football team has hyperbaric chambers. Have you ever noticed it's crazy how quickly they recover from injuries in their back?
That's true.
Because mostly it's because of hyperbaric chambers. They're forcing high energy blood and oxygenated blood into their blood plasma.
Accelerating the healing.
They're accelerating the healing. So you remember, some of you may remember, it's been back in the 90s, this little girl about 2 years old, her name was Jessica something, and they were out, I think, in Texas, somewhere out in the West, and there was an oil well drilled and not capped. So she was running in the yard, and when she stepped, this leg went down, and she just whooped right down in that thing, about 20 feet. Now, this was an 8-inch, I believe it was, but it was kind of lubricated, so she went down quite a ways. That thing went hundreds of feet. So the entire world was on edge. I remember it distinctively. It was in the early 90s. The entire world was on edge. It took them several days. They dug up that yard. They finally got her harnessed to where she couldn't slip any farther. They cut the pipe below her, and they brought her out of that. But she had stayed in that for like 2 or 3 days in the splits. Her legs like this. Well, every bit of this one leg was totally, the circulation had been cut off for days. So immediately, this is what they said. Immediately the doctor said, we have to amputate her leg. Immediately, all the tissue's dead. Everything's gone. And someone said, let's try this first. Let's put her in a hyperbaric chamber. They put her in a hyperbaric chamber, and within a few hours, her skin began to start turning pink again. And when it was all said and done, she had a little bit of one of her toes. The end of one of her toes had to be removed, but that was all she had wrong with her.
Wow.
And she completely healed at a rapid pace in that hyperbaric chamber.
From that pressure.
So, actually, I've got the notes here. It was 1987. I'm sorry, it wasn't the 90s. So they called her Baby Jessica. You can Google that, by the way. And so, in pre-flood conditions, people would grow bigger.
It'd be a giant hyperbaric chamber, right?
Yeah.
So in China and Japan, a man grew a tomato plant in a hyperbaric chamber. It grew over 40 feet tall, and it produced over 15,000 tomatoes, one plant.
He was experimenting just to see, so he planted one tomato plant, and it lived for years. Now, you realize, plant your tomatoes in the spring, and they look like death eating a cracker come September.
That's true.
But you could still pull a few old tomatoes off of it. This guy was getting tomatoes 15,000 tomatoes later.
So it looks to me like with pre-flood conditions, the earth being a hyperbaric chamber, right?
Right.
A big terrarium, right?
Right.
Plants would have grown to enormous size, right?
Right.
Animals would have grown to enormous size, right? Even people, right, would have grown to enormous size. That just makes sense.
Okay, so remember, the sun's blasting us. You got that filtered out completely. So, did people grow that big? Yes. Did they live with dinosaurs? Well, of course they did. It wasn't abnormal for them because that's all they had ever known. That's all they had ever known. So the earth having that layer filtering out the sun and the sunlight and not being able to age, people would live longer. They would live bigger. They would get bigger because if you we have gravity gnawing at us every day. We have the sun beating us down every day. Why is something old worth so much? Is because it stood. It passed the test of time. So it became worth more. So, evolution says the direct opposite.
Started out small, we're getting bigger.
Right, and we're not.
Science shows us that it would have been the other way around.
Science proves the Bible correct. Because
that.
The second law of thermodynamics, nothing left to itself will ever get better, only get worse. So, Numbers chapter 13.
See, this one I know, right?
Yeah.
Because, like I said last week, there's giants all through the Bible. And in Numbers chapter 13, Moses has sent the spies, the 12 spies from the 12 tribes, into the promised land to see what it looks like, right? And they all come back, and the report they give is, in this land, we saw giants. We saw big people. And in their sight, we look like grasshoppers, they said. There are giants, the sons of Anak, living there in the promised land, right? So giants existed at this time.
Yeah, they existed. So, here's the thing. We need to realize that the Bible even talks about King Og. King Og.
He had the big bed, right?
He had that big, huge bed. And we'll look at that too. But let me just give you a couple of historical positives that to back up. In June 1931, large skeletons were found in Nevada. 2 were 8.5 feet tall. 1 was 10 feet tall.
Huh.
Well, they weren't 10 feet tall. They were 10 feet long. They were laying down probably. So in the 1950s, a femur bone was excavated during a road construction in southeast Turkey, and the bone measured 47.25. That's your femur bone in your leg. 47.25 inches. That person would have been between 14 and 16 feet tall. Magellan went ashore at San Julian, and they reported the first person they saw was a giant human, 10 feet tall, and he belonged to the tribe of giants. Sir Francis Drake reported that very same sighting.
Wow.
Recorded it, very same sighting. Get this, and it's called Dinosaur Park in Texas. This massive flood, massive flood. Just, I don't know when it happened. Several years ago. It's been there for years. But it was so massive that it moved layers of rock. So it completely unearthed layers of rock. And when all of that floodwaters receded, they found dinosaur tracks. And I think they were 22-inch, 24-inch man's footprints right beside dinosaur tracks. So they call it Dinosaur Park in Texas. So while this sediment was cooling, a man of great height walked across the very same thing that a dinosaur walked across.
Wow.
So pretty cool. So excavations have uncovered 39-pound axe heads. Now you got to be a big dude to swing that kind of.
I could do it, I think.
Probably. I think you could. Turkey says that they found the grave of Noah. They say in the mountains of Ararat, and that he's 12 feet tall.
Really?
That's what they're saying. Waukesha, Wisconsin, human skulls were found 3 times the size of a normal human's.
That's wild.
So, Italy, 11 feet 6 inch
Skeletons.
skeleton. The Roman Emperor Maximus was 8.5 feet tall. That's where we get our word maximum. Or to the max is from him because he was so stinking tall. He was 8.5 feet tall. Excavations in India have unearthed 9.5-foot skeletons, 9-foot skeletons. 20 skeletons were unearthed in Shreveport, Louisiana, and they were embedded in seashells, and they were all over 10 feet tall. Here's a couple more.
Near South Bend, Indiana, 1925, amateur archaeologists opened a mound, and they found 8 skeletons ranging from 8 foot to 9 feet tall, all of them wearing armor. Armor?
Yeah. Now tell me, these people didn't that they existed millions of years ago. No, they didn't have armor millions of years ago.
1883, a 12-foot skeleton was found in California. 1891, a 12-foot skeleton was found in Tucson, Arizona. Genesis 6:4 tells us there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, the word says, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old men of renown.
Okay, so that verse, I think we need to land the plane. Now I want to do a couple more. Let's land it right here. I tell you what, Darius. We want to come back next week. We want to talk about 18-foot tall rhinoceroses.
What?
50-foot dragonflies.
What?
Yeah, we're going to talk about all that. So 6-foot salamanders.
What?
So I want to land the plane right here on this one. I want you to go with me on this one. and indulge me here just a minute. The only time that the DNA of man was ever
like adulterated?
Adulterated, let's put it that way, was ever lessened or weakened was in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, when the sons of God, meaning the fallen angels, kicked out of heaven, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children with them, and they became men of renown. When you are renowned, that means you're very well known. So the only time in our existence that the man's DNA became diluted or mixed, shortly after God did something to make sure he took care of the problem. He flooded the earth.
Wow.
He flooded the earth to make sure that he rid the earth of that mixed DNA, of that changing of the DNA. Let's land the plane, and we'll hit on this a little bit. We'll finish this one up. We'll jump into next week. We'll look at six-day creation and gap theories. We'll look a little bit more at the flood. So, hey, have some fun. Have some fun discussing this.
I've been having fun.
Hey, it's a blast, man. This stuff is so interesting.
I love it.
And you know, we're going to get way more scriptural as it goes. I promise you. So believe me, if you're watching this later on, we're in December 2021. We're in Christmas season, and if we're going to believe that Jesus was born on this earth, came down and gave his life for us, for the sins of mankind, for the remission of sins,
right,
then we've got to know that we can't discredit him in creation.
Right.
So it's very important that we know what we believe, and that we don't buy into something, and we don't mix down our DNA. So hey, have some discussion, ask some questions. We're real people
living real lives,
serving a real God.
Welcome home.